He told me I'd get served on Thursday. He said it like a weather report. He'd moved $61,000 out of our savings. He never blinked. He smiled at his mother that same week. He called himself the victim. He filed the papers first. He swore under oath the joint accounts were everything we had. He signed his name like a man who'd already won. He never once asked about the account in my maiden name. He never even knew it existed. In a courthouse in Macon, Georgia, his own lawyer would go pale, reading a balance Marcus swore didn't exist. But before any of that, there was a Tuesday morning, a pot of coffee, a folder on the kitchen table. Let me take you back 6 weeks. Marcus set the folder down. I already filed Renata, he said. You'll get served Thursday. He didn't look up from his phone. I finished pouring his coffee first. I set the mug in front of him. Steam curled off the top. It was the same blue mug he'd used every morning for 11 years. Then I asked one question, flat and even. How much is left in the joint checking? Marcus finally looked up. That's not the point right now. It's exactly the point, I said. Answer the question. He didn't. He picked up the mug. He took a sip. He looked back at his phone like the conversation was over. It was our 11th anniversary. The folder sat between us, plain and beige. Government blue ink stamped the tab. I did not raise my voice. I never do. I learned long ago. Raising your voice just gives people a reason to stop listening. My name is Renata Coleman Delaney. I'm 44. Deep brown skin. My locks pulled back in the low twist I wear for work. I've spent 20 years in hospital billing offices. Told to wait. Told to check back. Told to speak to someone else. I did not scream at Marcus that morning. I picked up my own coffee. I took a slow sip. I looked at the folder the way I look at any invoice that needs reconciling. 6 weeks, Marcus said, like he was doing me a favour. You'll want to find a place. I have a place, I said. It's called my house. He almost smiled at that. It was the smile of a man who thinks he's already counted every dollar. And I hadn't caught up yet. He grabbed his keys off the counter. He kissed the air near my cheek. 11 years of habit. He walked out to his truck like it was any other Tuesday. I stood at the sink. I watched him back out of the driveway. I did not cry. I rinsed his mug. I set it in the rack. I went upstairs to get dressed for work. I grew up on Lorraine Street in Cedar Hollow, a small town 20 minutes outside Macon. The AME church there still has my mother's alto voice worked into the choir loft floor. 30 years of Sunday mornings pressed into the wood. My father, Deacon Willis Coleman, drove a postal route for 31 years. He raised me to believe two things. A woman should always be able to read her own paperwork. A woman should always keep one door only she can open. I married Marcus 11 years ago in that same church, in a dress my mother altered by hand. I believed we were building something together, the way people believe things they've decided not to examine too closely. I drove to Coliseum Medical that morning, the way I always do. I passed the diner on Vinerville Road, the one where Marcus and I used to get pancakes on Saturdays, back before his schedule filled up with things he never explained. I parked in my usual spot. I walked into the billing office at 7:52, 8 minutes early, the way I have for 12 years. By 9 that morning, 3 departments were arguing over a charge that didn't reconcile. A vendor invoice for radiology equipment had come in almost $200,000 over the purchase order. Nobody could find where it started. I pulled both documents. I laid them side by side on my desk. I found it in 9 minutes. A decimal point, moved one place to the right, buried in a line item nobody had checked since March. How did you catch that so fast? My supervisor asked, standing over my shoulder. I don't guess, I said. I checked the math. I said it plainly, the way I say most things. Then I went back to my spreadsheet. I've been the person people call when a number won't balance. 12 years running. Not once, in 12 years, had an auditor found an error with my name on it. Nobody threw me a parade for that. It just quietly kept the lights on for everyone around me, including, I was starting to understand, for Marcus. My supervisor is a heavy-set man named Roland. He likes to tell people at hospital fundraisers that I've saved the billing department more money than 3 consultants combined. He usually says it the way you talk about a good tool. Admiring, slightly incurious about what it cost me to become that reliable. I'd noticed the difference a long time ago. Competence in a woman like me got filed under useful, not impressive. I decided years back I'd rather be quietly indispensable than loudly celebrated. Indispensable came with leverage. Leverage nobody could take from me on a whim. I thought about that leverage a lot, driving home those first weeks after the folder landed on the table. Marcus had built his whole identity on looking impressive. The biggest commission checks, the newest truck, the loudest laugh at his mother's table. I'd built mine on being quietly correct. For 11 years, that had just seemed like two different temperaments sharing a marriage. Now I understood it as two different survival strategies. Only one of us had left behind an actual asset, once the marriage came apart. That night I sat at the kitchen table with 3 months of bank statements spread out like evidence. Because that's what they were. $61,400 had left the joint savings account since March. Small withdrawals, spaced out, never enough at once to trip a flag on a glance. I caught it anyway. I've spent my whole career learning to see the number underneath the number. Where did the money go, Marcus? I asked when he finally came home at 9, smelling like someone else's cologne. Business expenses, he said. You wouldn't understand the sales side. I understand $61,000, I said. Try me. He didn't try me. He walked past me into the bedroom. He shut the door. I sat alone with the statements. I ran my finger down each line, the way I'd run it down a hospital invoice that morning, hunting the decimal that had moved. I didn't know yet. In 3 months, a courtroom in Macon would hear a balance read out loud. One Marcus had no idea I held. I didn't know the answer had been sitting 9 years in an account under my maiden name, in a bank he'd never once asked about. Funded a little at a time ever since a loan officer looked past me and spoke only to him. I didn't know yet about the sealed envelope in the hallway closet. 3 words on the front, in my father's careful hand. I just sat at the table, in the quiet, and did what I always do. I checked the math. Marcus was 47, a regional sales director for a building supply company out of Macon, a man who'd built his whole identity on being the one who provided. 2 years earlier, without telling me, without telling his mother, without telling anyone, his territory got cut in half. His title got quietly downgraded on paper. His business card stayed the same. His commissions fell by nearly 60%. He told no one. Instead, he started pulling from the joint accounts to cover a lease across town, an apartment I'd never seen, for a woman named Kayla Vance who believed Marcus was already divorced. He was drowning. The fastest way he knew to stop drowning was to make sure the person next to him drowned first, or at least believed she had nothing left to swim toward. He'd convinced himself of something simple. If I walked away with nothing, no one would look closely enough to see what he'd actually done. He had no idea there was a door in his own house he'd never once tried to open. He'd never once thought to ask. My mother had passed 8 years earlier. My father, Deacon Willis Coleman, lived 4 more years past that. Long enough to walk me down the aisle, long enough to sit with me one August afternoon. The week I got engaged, he told me something I never forgot. Baby, he said, turning his coffee cup slowly on the porch rail, you can love a man with your whole chest. That's fine. That's good even. But you always keep one door, only you can open. You hear me? One door. He drove me that same week to First Magnolia Federal, a small credit union off Route 41. Most people in Cedar Hollow used it for nothing bigger than a car loan. He helped me open a savings account under my maiden name, Renata Coleman. Before I'd even picked out my wedding dress, he put in the first $200 himself. He told me never to mention it to anyone. Not because it was shameful. Some things a woman keeps aren't for explaining. Only for having. I funded that account quietly every payday for 9 years. $50 some months, $300 others. Whatever I could spare after the mortgage and the groceries. After 11 years of a marriage, I genuinely tried to build. I never touched it. I never mentioned it. Marcus never asked. In 11 years, it never once occurred to him that his wife might keep a door of her own. The week after the folder landed on the table, I sat in the office of a family law attorney named Eileen Prescott. Sharp, unhurried, silver-streaked hair. A whole career built on outlasting men exactly like Marcus. Tell me what you know, Eileen said, sliding a legal pad across the desk. I know he's hiding money, I said. I know he thinks I don't have anywhere to put mine. Eileen looked up at that. Something behind her eyes sharpened. Do you, she asked, have somewhere to put yours? I thought about the passbook, folded inside my father's old cigar box, top shelf of the hallway closet. I hadn't opened it in years. I'd never needed to. I thought about the sealed envelope tucked beside it. 3 words on the front. For Ara, when you need it. I might, I said quietly. I think it's time I checked. I didn't know yet exactly what I'd find. I only knew, the way I'd known about that decimal point, the number underneath the number was there, waiting. I was finally ready to go looking for it. That Saturday, while Marcus was out at what he called a client lunch, I pulled the cigar box down. My hands were steady. They're always steady. Inside, wrapped in a rubber band gone brittle, sat a small vinyl passbook. First Magnolia Federal. Faded gold letters on the cover. Beside it, the envelope. For R. When you need it. My father's handwriting, careful and upright. The same hand that had signed 31 years of parcels and money orders across Cedar Hollow. I sat down on the hallway floor, my back against the closet door. I opened it slow. Inside was a single folded sheet, yellowed at the creases. A second, newer page stapled behind it. The first was a photocopy of the original 2015 account paperwork. My father's signature as co-signer. My maiden name typed clean across the top. The second was a note, 4 lines, dated the same week my father died. Baby girl. I kept adding to this after the wedding, a little at a time, same as I always said I would. Don't tell your husband unless the day comes you need to. If that day comes, you'll know it. Love, Daddy. I sat with that for a long moment. I didn't cry. Not really. I just let my eyes go warm and still. I thought about a loan officer named Grissom, 9 years back. He'd spent 40 minutes explaining the mortgage terms to Marcus. He never once turned his chair toward me. He never answered a single question I asked directly. He answered Marcus, like I was furniture that happened to be sitting beside him. Near the end, filling out the household income line, he'd looked at me once sideways. He asked Marcus if I was the help that came with the house. He laughed when he said it. Marcus laughed too, a beat too late. The way men laugh when they haven't decided yet whose side a joke is on. I didn't laugh. I sat with my back straight in that chair. My own pay stubs in a folder on my lap he never once asked to see. I understood something plainly. It wasn't just that he doubted my numbers. It was that a black woman sitting quietly beside her husband didn't read to him as a co-signer at all. She read as staff. I remembered walking out of that office. I told my father that same week, my voice tight. He'd gone quiet. Then he said, "That's exactly why we're doing this, baby. Some doors, they'll never open for you polite, so you build your own." I'd thought he meant the mortgage. I understood now he'd meant something bigger. Monday morning I drove to First Magnolia Federal, the same low brick building it had always been. I asked for a current statement. A young teller pulled it up, printed it, folded it into an envelope without so much as a raised eyebrow. "Anything else, Mrs. Coleman?" the teller asked, reading the name off the screen. "That's all," I said. "Thank you." I didn't open the envelope in the parking lot. I drove home first. I sat at my own kitchen table, in my own chair, and opened it there. I read the number twice, just to be sure my eyes weren't doing something my mind wasn't ready to believe. Then I folded it back along its creases and put it in my purse. I went to make dinner because dinner still needed making. A woman like me does not let a number, however large, change the shape of her Monday. I told Eileen the following week. Same office, same legal pad. "It's been there 9 years," I said. "He's never once asked about it. He doesn't know it exists." "Good," Eileen said, not even blinking at the figure I slid across the desk. "That's exactly how we want it to stay. Until it isn't." Eileen laid out what came next. Tina. Plain and procedural, the way I like information delivered. Marcus would have to submit a sworn financial disclosure. Every account, every asset, every debt, under penalty of perjury. If he swore the joint accounts were the whole of it, and it later proved otherwise, that was his problem. Not mine. My account was solely in my maiden name, opened years before the wedding, never commingled, never touched by joint funds. Under Georgia law, that made it about as untouchable as money could be. Eileen walked me through the timeline too. Discovery would take months, not weeks. Georgia courts moved slow on contested divorces, slower still when dissipation was on the table. There would be interrogatories first, written questions under oath both sides, then requests for documents. Bank records, tax returns, pay stubs, anything with a dollar sign on it. Then, if the numbers didn't line up clean, depositions. I want you prepared for slow, Eileen said. Slow is normal. Slow is not losing. I've got patience, I said. I've had 9 years of practice. Eileen smiled at that, small and quick. Good, you're going to need every bit of it. I drove home that evening turning the timeline over in my mind, the way I turn over any process at work before I trust it. Months of statements, months of questions, months of Marcus performing normalcy at Dot's table, while a case built quietly against him in a filing cabinet across town. I didn't mind the wait. I'd waited 9 years to find out what a small credit union account could become. A few more months felt almost easy by comparison. I stopped at the grocery store on the way home, out of habit, the way I do most Tuesdays. I stood in the cereal aisle a long moment, not really looking at anything, just letting my mind settle. An older woman near the register recognized me from church, asked how I was holding up. I'm managing, I said. Some days better than others. That's about all any of us can do, the woman said. She patted my arm and moved on. I stood there another moment, grateful, in a small, quiet way, for a kindness that asked nothing back. What about his 61,000, I asked. The part he's hiding. That's the part we go looking for, Eileen said. You said the garage, a locked cabinet he calls work stuff. Every man who says work stuff means something he doesn't want opened, I said. Eileen almost smiled. We'll get a subpoena for his financial records instead. Cleaner. Let the paper do the digging. It took 3 weeks for the subpoena to produce anything. When it did, it came all at once. 2 years of commission statements, each one lower than the last. A formal letter from Marcus's employer, dated 23 months earlier, telling him his territory was being restructured, his base commission cut by 58%, a lease agreement dated 4 months back for a 1-bedroom apartment on the east side of Macon, co-signed by a woman named Kayla Vance. I read the lease twice. I didn't throw anything. I didn't call Marcus screaming. I set the papers down on Eileen's desk, folded my hands, said very quietly, so the 61,000 wasn't business expenses. No, Eileen said. It was rent for a life he was already living somewhere else. The following weekend, I finally told Camille everything. I sat on the edge of my own bed, the bank statements spread across the comforter, the same way I'd once spread them alone at the kitchen table. Camille listened without interrupting. Her jaw tightened a little further with every detail. The 61,000. The apartment I'd never seen. The sealed envelope, still unopened at that point, sitting in the cigar box. Why didn't you call me the day he set that folder down? Camille finally asked, voice thick. Because I needed to know what I was dealing with first, I said. Before I let anybody else's feelings into the room, yours included. I love you, Camille. But you'd have driven up here and said something to him I couldn't take back on your behalf. Camille laughed despite herself, wiping her eyes. You're not wrong. I still might. Save it, I said. There's a courtroom that's going to want to turn first. And Daddy's envelope, Camille said. You haven't opened it yet. Not yet, I admitted. Some part of me's been saving it, for when I actually need it. Not just when I'm curious. Mama always said you were the patient one, Camille said, squeezing my hand. I used to think that meant you didn't feel things as strong as I did. I don't think that anymore. I think you just feel them longer, quieter. You make them count when you finally let them out. I sat with that, the truth of it landing somewhere I hadn't expected a sentence from my little sister to reach. I think that's exactly right, I said. I think that's the whole inheritance, actually. Not the money, the patience it took to build it, quiet without anybody noticing. My cousin Denise worked as a teller at a different bank clear across town, a Regions branch off Riverside Drive. The two of us talked most Wednesday nights, the way we had since we were girls sharing a bedroom at our grandmother's house every summer. Denise didn't know about the divorce filing yet. I hadn't told anyone outside of Eileen's office, not even my own sister, until that weekend. I'd learned early. A story told too soon gets edited by everyone who hears it. You're never going to believe who came into my branch Tuesday, Denise said. One particular Wednesday. Her voice was pitched low, the way it got when she had gossip worth protecting. Try me, I said. The same 2 words I'd said to Marcus weeks earlier. This time I meant them differently. Marcus, Denise said. With some woman. Young. They were opening a joint application for an apartment lease. right at my coworker's desk, laughing about paint colours, like they were picking out a whole life together. I sat very still on my side of the phone. What was her name? Kayla something, Denise said. Vance, I think. Why? Renata, is everything okay? I looked down at my own hand, flat on the kitchen table. Steady, the way it always is. Everything's about to be, I said. Denise, can you remember the date you saw them? 3rd Tuesday of last month, Denise said. I remember because my register came up short that same day. I had to stay late. I wrote the date on the legal pad Eileen had given me. I wrote it beside a withdrawal from the joint savings account dated 4 days earlier. $600, marked simply ATM. I stared at the two numbers sitting next to each other. 4 days before Marcus and Kayla Vance sat down to co-sign a lease. $600 in cash had walked out of an account I'd spent 11 years helping to fill. It wasn't love gone quietly cold. Not the way I'd almost let myself believe in the early weeks. It was arithmetic. Marcus hadn't drifted away from the marriage. He'd been siphoning it, one careful withdrawal at a time, to fund a second life in the dark. The first one kept paying his bills. I called Eileen the next morning. I have a date and a name, I said. Kayla Vance. A lease application. 4 days after a $600 cash withdrawal. That's not just spending, Eileen said. That's dissipation of marital assets. Georgia courts take a dim view of a spouse funding an affair with joint funds. Keep every receipt, every statement. We're going to need all of it. I kept every receipt. I built a spreadsheet the way I build every spreadsheet. Clean columns, dates lined up like soldiers, formulas that caught my own mistakes before anyone else could. 11 months of withdrawals, cross-referenced against a lease I now had a copy of. Courtesy of a records request Eileen's paralegal filed the following week. The math told its own story. Plain. Undeniable. The kind of story I trusted more than any conversation Marcus might try to have with me. I thought, more than once during those weeks, about Grissom. About the angle of his chair, 9 years earlier. I sat with a folder of my own pay stubs in my lap. Nobody in that office ever asked to see them. I'd had the better credit score. I'd never missed a payment on anything. My whole adult life. None of it mattered in that room. The room had already decided, before I opened my mouth, whose numbers got explained and whose didn't. I'd left that office and cried exactly once, in the car, for exactly 4 minutes. Then I wiped my face and drove straight to First Magnolia with my father in the passenger seat. I opened a door of my own. I hadn't cried again about it since. I wasn't going to start now. The subpoenaed cabinet in the garage, once Eileen's investigator got a court order to inventory it, turned out to hold exactly what I suspected. A restructuring letter from Marcus's employer, dated 23 months earlier. His territory consolidated. His base commission cut by 58%. He'd never mentioned it to me, as far as anyone could tell, not to his own mother either. Behind it, a stack of commission statements month by month, showing a career quietly falling apart. While Marcus kept driving the same truck, wearing the same watch, telling everyone at Dot's table that business was better than ever. He's been performing solvency for 2 years, Eileen said, laying the documents out across her desk like a hand of cards. The apartment, the withdrawals, all of it makes a lot more sense now. A man terrified of looking like he's failing will do almost anything to keep the performance going, including drain the one person still propping him up. That's the part that gets me, I said. I was propping him up the whole time. I just didn't know I was also paying for the apartment. He was propping himself up in somewhere else. Eileen didn't try to soften that for me. I was grateful. I've spent enough of my life in rooms where people softened the truth until it lost its shape. I preferred the number, plain and whole, sitting there on the desk where I could look straight at it. That Sunday at Dot's table again, I sat through another round of Dot's corrections. Another comment about a woman's duty to keep a man happy. Dot said it with real confidence. She had no idea her own son had been lying to her for 2 years. I passed the sweet tea. I said very little. I watched Marcus laugh too loud at his own jokes. The laugh of a man performing a life he could no longer afford. Midway through the meal, I set my fork down. Marcus, I said, mild as the weather. How's the territory doing these days? Feels like it's been a while since you talked shop at dinner. Marcus's fork paused over his plate. Just a fraction of a second, small enough that Dot didn't catch it. I caught everything now. the way I catch a misplaced decimal at the hospital, the way I've learned to catch every small hitch in a story that didn't add up. Same as always, Marcus said, a beat too quickly. Steady. You know how sales goes up and down. Must be nice. Steady, I said. Still mild, still passing the greens. I was just thinking, with gas prices where they are, your commute out to the western counties must eat into things some. It's manageable, Marcus said, reaching for his sweet tea, his hand moving just slightly faster than it needed to. Dot, oblivious, jumped in with her own commentary about gas prices. The moment folded back into the ordinary noise of a family meal. I filed it anyway, the way I file everything now, beside the $600 withdrawal, beside Denise's phone call, beside a restructuring letter I didn't have in hand yet but somehow already suspected existed. I'd asked one ordinary question and watched a man's whole performance flicker for half a second. Half a second, I was learning, was usually all the time a lie needed to show you its shape. I thought, driving home that night, about how much of my marriage had probably been built on exactly that kind of flicker. Moments I'd been too busy, too trusting, or too tired to notice, scattered across 11 years like decimal points, quietly moved one place to the right, waiting for someone determined enough to check the whole column. I had the sealed envelope from my father folded now in the bottom of my purse, alongside the first Magnolia statement, alongside the spreadsheet with its clean columns and its unforgiving dates. I wasn't angry the way Dot might have expected. Loud, wounded, asking to be pitied. I was calm, the specific way my father raised me to be calm. The calm of someone who already knows how the math comes out, simply waiting for everyone else in the room to catch up. I don't raise my voice, I said to myself that night, driving home under a sky gone the colour of a bruise healing. I just checked the math. I said it quietly, to no one, the way my father used to talk to himself on his porch. For the first time in 6 weeks, I let myself smile. The financial disclosure deadline landed on a Friday in late spring. Marcus signed his under a notary's seal at his own attorney's office. No phone call to me to ask what I planned to list on mine. His disclosure ran 3 pages. It listed the joint checking account, drained to $1,100. It listed the joint savings, drained to almost nothing. It listed his truck, his half of the house equity, a small 401k that had lost most of its match the year his commissions collapsed. Nowhere on those 3 pages did it mention an apartment lease on the east side of Macon. Nowhere did it mention Kayla Vance. Nowhere did it mention the restructuring letter sitting in a folder at Eileen's office, his own employer's letterhead across the top. At the bottom of the 3rd page, above his signature, sat one sentence in bold. I certify under penalty of perjury that the foregoing is a true, complete and accurate statement of all assets and liabilities. I read that sentence 3 times. He signed this, I said. He did, Eileen said. Which means, once we introduce the apartment, the lease, and the withdrawals that funded it, this sentence becomes the whole ballgame, not the money he hid, the lie he told about hiding it. My own disclosure was 1 page. The house, the joint accounts as they now stood, my half of a modest 401k through the hospital system. At the bottom, 1 line I wrote myself. I read it aloud to Eileen, just to hear how it sounded in the world for the first time. Separate property, savings and retirement account, First Magnolia Federal, held in maiden name Renata Coleman, established 2015, prior to marriage. Not commingled with marital funds. I didn't write the balance. Georgia law didn't require it. Not at this stage. Only the existence and separate character of a clearly separate asset. Eileen had been precise about that. Let the number stay quiet a little longer, she said. Some things land harder when they're read out loud in a room full of people who assumed they already knew the whole story. Marcus's attorney, a brisk young man named Kobe Reinhardt, called Eileen's office the week disclosures were exchanged. He had the confidence of a man who believed he already held every card. We saw the line about a separate account, Reinhardt said. My client's confident it's negligible. He'd like to move toward a quick settlement. He's willing to be generous about the house. Generous, Eileen repeated. I sat across the desk and watched her write the word down and underline it twice. The way you underline something you plan to enjoy, quoting back later. We'll see you at the deposition, Eileen told him, and hung up before he could say anything else. The deposition was set for the Bibb County Courthouse, a squat limestone building downtown I'd passed 100 times, without ever imagining I'd walk through its doors as anything but a spectator. I dressed carefully that morning, a navy suit my mother would have approved of, my locks pulled back neat and low, a folder of my own tucked under one arm, even though Eileen would do most of the talking. In the hallway outside the deposition room, a young paralegal from Reinhardt's office glanced at me. "Ma'am, could you grab some water for the room?" she said without hesitation. "There's a station just past the elevators." I looked at her for a long moment. Calm. Unreadable. "I'm not the court reporter," I said evenly. "I'm the client." The paralegal's face went through several shades of embarrassment. A stammered apology followed. Eileen, standing beside me, didn't raise her voice either. Her jaw tightened in a way I recognized, the particular stillness of a woman filing something away for later use. "It happens," I said quietly, once the paralegal hurried off. "It happened to me 9 years ago in a bank downtown. A man there decided I wasn't worth turning his chair toward. I built a whole account nobody knew about because of that exact 5 minutes." Eileen studied me a moment. "You know, in 11 years of practicing family law, I've watched a lot of people get underestimated in a lot of rooms. It's usually the ones who get underestimated the most who end up holding the steadiest cards when it finally matters. I don't think that's a coincidence. People who've had to prove themselves everywhere just get better at building things quietly. They've never had the luxury of assuming anyone would hand them anything. My father used to say something close to that," I said. "Not in so many words. He just said, 'Keep one door only you can open.' I think he meant exactly what you just said." "Then let's go open it," Eileen said, "in front of the one room today that actually has to listen." We walked into the deposition room together, my spine straight, my father's voice somewhere in the back of my mind. A woman should always be able to read her own paperwork. Some rooms only respect you once you've made them. Marcus sat across the table already, his tie a shade too bright for a room this serious. Kobe Reinhardt beside him, shuffling papers with brisk confidence. The confidence of a man who thought this would be over in 40 minutes. He glanced at me once, a small, tight smile crossing his face, the same one he'd worn the morning he set the folder on the kitchen table. "Morning, Renata," he said. "This doesn't have to take long." "No," I said, "it really doesn't." The court reporter swore Marcus in. Reinhardt walked him through the disclosure, page by page, smooth and practiced, each question landing exactly where he wanted it. Marcus answered every question the way a man answers when he believes the only audience that matters is the one across the table, not the transcript being typed word for word into a permanent record. "Mr. Delaney," Reinhardt said, "to your knowledge, does this financial disclosure represent the complete and accurate marital estate?" "It does," Marcus said. "Every account, every dollar. Nothing's hidden." Eileen let that sentence sit a beat too long, the way she lets most things sit. I watched Marcus shift slightly in his chair. Some old animal instinct sensing the room's temperature had changed before his mind caught up to why. I thought about the 6 weeks since the folder landed on my table, the bank statements spread out like evidence, my father's handwriting on an envelope I'd carried in my purse for weeks, worn soft at the folds, the teller who slid a printout across a counter without a raised eyebrow, Denise's voice on the phone, low and worried, delivering a date and a name that changed everything. Dot's table, the sweet tea, the corrections disguised as concern. I had checked the math every single time. It had never once failed me. "Mr. Delaney," Eileen said finally, level and unhurried, "I'd like to go through a few specific figures with you before we finish today." Marcus glanced at his attorney, then back at Eileen, the small tight smile finally, almost imperceptibly beginning to falter. $61,400, Eileen said, sliding a printed statement across the table. The joint savings account highlighted in yellow down every withdrawal. Withdrawn between March and September of this year. "Can you walk us through where that money went?" Marcus's jaw tightened. "Business expenses, client dinners, travel for the territory." "Your employer's own reimbursement records tell a different story," Eileen said, sliding a second page across. "We subpoenaed them last month. No travel or entertainment charges over $400 for that same period. Would you like to revise your answer?" Reinhardt leaned over and whispered something. Marcus's face went through the particular stiffness of a man doing arithmetic he did not want an audience for. I may have used some of it for personal expenses, Marcus said. That's not illegal. It's my money too. It's marital money, Eileen said, which the court will want an accounting of, particularly given a certain lease agreement, dated 4 months ago, co-signed by a Kayla Vance, at an address roughly 11 minutes from this courthouse. The room went very still. Reinhardt's pen stopped moving. I didn't look at Marcus's face in that moment, and I felt the shift in the air. The particular silence of a man realizing the floor under him wasn't where he'd left it. That's not relevant to the financial disclosure, Reinhardt said quickly, recovering first. It's entirely relevant, Eileen said, to whether your client dissipated marital assets to fund an undisclosed relationship, which Georgia courts absolutely consider an equitable distribution. But that's a matter for the judge at the final hearing. Today we're simply establishing the record. Marcus said nothing else of substance the rest of that session. Reinhardt called a recess 20 minutes later, ostensibly to confer privately. I suspected, watching them disappear down the hallway with their heads bent close, they were doing something else, recalculating everything Marcus had promised him about how this case would go. We didn't finish the deposition that day. Reinhardt requested a continuance. He cited the need to review newly disclosed financial matters. He got it. Eileen translated that for me in the parking lot afterward. He just found out his client lied to him too. The weeks that followed moved slower, settling into the procedural rhythm of a case grinding forward. Eileen filed a motion putting the court on notice of the undisclosed lease and the pattern of withdrawals, asking for a full accounting at the final hearing. Judge Patricia Alvarez granted the motion without much comment, set a final hearing date 6 weeks out, ordered both parties to supplement their disclosures under penalty of further sanction. Marcus moved out during that stretch. Into the apartment on the east side of Macon, I now knew down to the square footage. He took his truck, his tools from the garage, and very little else. He didn't ask for the good china, or the porch swing his own mother had given us as a wedding gift, or any of the small domestic architecture of 11 years he quietly left behind, as if some part of him already understood he wasn't entitled to carry much of it out the door. Dot called me once during that stretch. Her voice was smaller than I'd ever heard it, none of its usual certainty, intact. "Is it true?" Dot asked. "About the apartment. About the girl." "It's true," I said gently. Whatever Dot had said at that dinner table over the years, she was still an old woman. Finding out her own son had lied to her for 2 years. I had no interest in making that discovery crueler. Dot was quiet a long moment. "He told me the territory changes barely touched him," she finally said. "He told me business was better than ever." "He told a lot of people a lot of things," I said. "I think he was more scared of looking like he was failing than he was of actually failing." "That sounds like something his father would have done," Dot said so quietly I almost missed it. There was something in that sentence, some old family weather system I'd never had access to before. It made me understand, for the first time in 11 years. Dot's corrections at the dinner table had probably never really been about me at all. I didn't tell Dot about the first Magnolia account. Some doors, my father used to say, aren't for explaining, only for having. I meant to keep that one closed until the day it needed to open in front of exactly the right room. That day was coming. I could feel it the way I feel a decimal point sitting one place too far to the right. A small wrongness in the shape of things. It wouldn't resolve until someone finally laid the real numbers side by side and let them speak. Kayla Vance found out the truth about Marcus roughly a month before the final hearing. Not from me, not from anyone connected to the case. She found out the way people usually find these things out. By accident, through a mutual acquaintance, at a birthday dinner. The acquaintance mentioned offhand that Marcus's divorce had been dragging on. Over some money situation, she said. She also mentioned his commissions had reportedly been cut nearly in half, 2 years back. Kayla, 29, a dental hygienist, had genuinely believed Marcus was already comfortably divorced. She called him that night, demanding answers. I heard about the call secondhand, through Denise, who'd heard it through the same acquaintance. The way small towns like Cedar Hollow pass information along a chain that always somehow finds its way back around. Kayla had asked Marcus, point blank, why he'd let her co-sign a lease believing his finances were stable, when he'd been quietly bleeding his marital accounts for over a year just to make the rent. She moved out the following week, Denise reported. Took her name off the lease. He's covering it alone now, on a commission that's been cut in half. I didn't celebrate that news, not loudly, not even privately in any way I'd have admitted to Dot or Eileen. I simply noted it, the way I note any fact in the case. Filed it next to the withdrawal dates and the restructuring letter. One more piece of a picture that had been building itself since a folder landed on my kitchen table. I spent that final month doing the quiet, unglamorous work Eileen had asked of me. I gathered 12 years of my own hospital pay stubs to establish a clean, documented history of my own separate income. At Eileen's request, I wrote out a full timeline of the marriage, dates and milestones and the slow accumulation of small corrections. I was only now beginning to see clearly, a marriage that had been quietly unequal for longer than I'd wanted to admit. I met with a financial expert Eileen retained, a soft-spoken forensic accountant named Harold Okonkwo. He reviewed every document and prepared a clean summary for the court. $61,400, Okonkwo told me, at our final meeting before the hearing, tapping the summary page. Traced almost dollar for dollar. Rent, furniture deliveries. A jewellery purchase for a Kayla Vance made 8 months ago at a store on Riverside Drive. About as clean a dissipation case as I've built in 11 years of this work. And the first Magnolia account? I asked. Is it protected the way Eileen says it is? About as protected as an asset can be, Okonkwo said. Opened years before the marriage. Funded exclusively from your own income. Never once commingled with joint funds. Never listed as an asset on a single joint loan application. It's yours. It was always yours. He simply never thought to ask. I thought about that phrase a long time after the meeting ended. He simply never thought to ask. It was, I realised, the truest thing anyone had said about my whole marriage. Marcus never asked what I kept in my own name. Never asked what my father told me on that porch. Never asked why I sometimes drove to a small credit union on Route 41 instead of our usual bank. He'd simply assumed, the way people assume things about the quiet ones in the room, there was nothing there worth asking about. I called my mother's old friend Miss Odessa that week, a woman who'd known the Coleman family since before I was born, mostly just to hear a voice that remembered my father clearly. Miss Odessa was 81 now, still sharp, still sitting on the same porch, 2 streets over from where I grew up. Your daddy was a careful man, Miss Odessa said, once I explained, in general terms, what I was going through. Careful men don't leave things to chance. If he built you a door, baby, it's still standing. You just have to go find it. I found it, I said. I think I finally understand what it's for. Then use it, Miss Odessa said. Don't you dare feel guilty about using it either. That's exactly what it was built for. I thanked her. I sat with the phone in my lap a while after we hung up, thinking about how many women in Cedar Hollow had probably built quiet doors of their own over the years. Doors nobody outside the family ever heard about. Some doors got used. Some doors just sat there, unopened. Because the day that needed them never quite arrived. Or arrived, and the woman who built the door had already passed on without ever getting the chance. I felt sitting there, a strange kinship with all of them. Women I'd never meet. Women who understood exactly what my father had been trying to teach me on that porch years ago. I drafted my own list of questions for Okonkwo the following week, the kind of list only someone who reconciles ledgers for a living would think to ask. I wanted every commission statement cross-referenced against his sales calendar. I wanted every ATM withdrawal mapped against the lease payment schedule. I wanted, more than anything, a summary clean enough that a judge with no patience for jargon could read it once and understand exactly what had happened in plain English with plain numbers to convey. This is thorough, Okonkwo told me, reviewing my list. Most clients just want to know the bottom line. You want to know the architecture underneath the bottom line. I build ledgers for a living too, I said. I know what it looks like when somebody's trying to hide the architecture. I wanted to make sure you weren't missing any of it. I wasn't, Okonkwo said. But I appreciate the check. Most people never think to ask an expert to show their work. Okonkwo's final written report ran 11 pages. It laid the whole marital financial picture out with a clarity I found almost soothing. The way a fully reconciled ledger always soothes me, however uncomfortable the numbers underneath it were. The house on Delwood Lane, appraised at $310,000, carried a remaining mortgage of $118,000. Most of it paid down steadily from my own hospital paychecks over 11 years. Marcus's contributions had grown increasingly inconsistent over the final two. The joint checking account, once a comfortable $8,000 cushion, now sat at $1,100. The joint savings, which had held $94,000 3 years earlier, now held barely a fifth of that. Marcus's 401k, worth roughly $71,000 before his commission cuts, had been partially drawn down through early withdrawals he'd never disclosed. Each one carrying a tax penalty he'd apparently decided was a cost worth hiding rather than explaining. Against all of that sat the First Magnolia account, $136,000, built patiently over 9 years, from an opening deposit of $200, untouched by a single joint decision, unlisted on a single joint document, quietly compounding while the rest of the marital estate had spent 2 years hemorrhaging. You built more security by yourself in secret, on a fraction of his income, Eileen said, reviewing the figures one final time, than the two of you built together, in the open. That's not a coincidence, Renata. That's 12 years of discipline. Most people never develop it. Most people never had a reason to, as urgently as you did. I didn't build it to be right, I said. I built it because my father told me to, and because a man in a bank once made it very clear I'd need somewhere of my own to stand. Sometimes those two reasons end up being the same reason, Eileen said. You just don't find out which one actually saved you until years later. 2 weeks before the final hearing, I drove out to Cedar Hollow's small cemetery, alone on a Sunday afternoon. I sat a while at my father's grave, the granite still sharp-edged after 4 years, not yet softened by weather the way the older stones around it had been. I hadn't planned to say anything out loud. I found myself talking anyway, quietly. The way a person talks to a parent, they still consult on every important decision, whether or not that parent can answer back. You were right about the door, Daddy, I said. I kept it. I never told him. Turns out that's exactly what saved me. I sat until the light went long and gold across the grass. Then I drove home. I made myself dinner in a kitchen that had been quieter for months now. It somehow felt less empty than it ever had with Marcus in it. I slept better that night than I had in the 6 weeks since a beige folder first landed on my table. The final hearing was set for the second Tuesday of the following month, in Judge Alvarez's courtroom at the Bibb County Courthouse. Eileen called me the night before to walk through what to expect. Marcus and Reinhardt will try to minimize the dissipation numbers, Eileen said. They'll argue it's a smaller amount than it looks, spread thin enough not to matter. When they finish, I'm going to ask Marcus one question about the completeness of his disclosure. After that, we let the account speak for itself. And if he lies again, I asked, under oath, in front of the judge this time. Then he'll have done it twice. On the record in a courtroom, Eileen said. That's the mistake men like Marcus make. They spend so long getting away with small dishonesties, they forget a judge isn't the same audience as a girlfriend, or a mother, or a wife who used to let things go. I slept finally that whole night through. No bank statements spread across my bed, no legal pad on my nightstand. I woke early, pressed my navy suit, pulled my locks back neat and low the way I had for the deposition months before, tucked one final folder into my bag alongside the others. Inside sat a single certified statement from First Magnolia Federal, the balance printed clean and unambiguous at the bottom. Beside it, worn soft now at every fold, the envelope my father had left me 4 years earlier. For when you need it. Today, I thought, driving toward the courthouse under a sky just beginning to clear was exactly the day he'd meant. The night before, my younger sister Camille had driven up from Savannah to sit with me. That's how Camille always shows up. For the parts of my life that matter most. We've been that way since we were girls, sharing a room at our grandmother's house on weekends. Our parents worked doubles. Camille is 39, sharp-tongued in a way I've never quite managed. She sat cross-legged on my couch that evening with a glass of sweet tea, watching me lay 3 outfits on the bed, like I was prepping for a job interview instead of a hearing that would decide the shape of the rest of my life. You don't have to prove anything to that judge with your clothes, Camille said. The paperwork's going to do that. I know, I said. It's not about the judge, it's about walking in there looking like a woman who already knows how this ends. Camille laughed. The warm, easy laugh I'd missed more than I'd realised during the long, quiet months of building my case alone. Only you would treat a divorce hearing like Sunday service. Mama always said to dress for the room you deserve to be in, I said, not the room somebody else thinks you belong in. Camille grew quiet, turning her glass slowly on her knee. You ever think about telling Daddy's story to anybody besides me? What that loan officer did to you? What it cost to build that account in secret, instead of just walking into a bank and being believed? I sat on the edge of the bed, the navy suit hanging behind me on the closet door. I think about it, I admitted. But I don't know what good it does, telling it to people who've never had a banker look past them, like they weren't in the room. Some folks hear a story like that and think it's about one rude man on one bad afternoon. It was never just Grissom. It was every room after that one too. Every room where I had to bring twice the paperwork just to get half the consideration. So bring it tomorrow, Camille said, not to complain, just to remember what it cost and what it built. I think Daddy would want you to know the difference. I thought about that long after Camille had gone to sleep in the guest room, lying awake with the ceiling fan turning slow shadows across the room. I thought about the small, cumulative weight of being underestimated. Not just by Grissom 9 years ago, not just by Marcus for 11 years, by a whole procession of rooms that had quietly assumed I had less to offer than I did. Less credit, less authority, less claim to the space I occupied. None of those rooms had ever once had to answer for what it cost me. That particular ledger never got read aloud in any courtroom. There was no court built to hear it, but there was a court built to hear this. Tomorrow's court, at least, would have to reckon with one very specific number, attached to one very specific name. I intended to make sure it heard every syllable clearly. I arrived 40 minutes early, parked in the public garage across the street, sat in my car a few extra minutes before going in, watching the morning light move slowly across the limestone face of the building. Camille sat in the passenger seat, having insisted on coming along despite my protest that she didn't need to take the day off. You don't have to come in, I told her. This part, I can do. I know you can, Camille said. I'm not here because you need help. I'm here because Mama and Daddy would want somebody from this family in that gallery, somebody who actually knows what you built to get to this morning. I reached over and squeezed my sister's hand once. I got out of the car, smoothing the front of my suit. My locks pulled back neat and low, my folder tucked under one arm. Camille fell into step beside me. We crossed the street together, past the same limestone steps where, months later, Dot would apologise in the cold November light. Neither of us knew that yet. Inside, Eileen was already waiting near the elevators. A fresh folder under one arm, her expression calm and focused, the look of a lawyer who spent the whole previous night rehearsing exactly how a single afternoon needs to unfold. Ready? Eileen asked. I've been ready for 9 years, I said. I just didn't know it yet. The courtroom on the 3rd floor smelled the way old public buildings always seem to smell. Floor wax and paper, and something faintly like the inside of a filing cabinet, left open too long. I sat beside Eileen at the plaintiff's table, my folder squared in front of me, hands folded on top of it the way I fold them at my own kitchen table, when a number needs checking. Across the aisle, Marcus sat beside Reinhardt in a grey suit that fit him a little looser than it had 6 months earlier. The particular looseness of a man whose life had been quietly losing weight in ways his tailor hadn't accounted for. Dot sat in the gallery, 3 rows back, alone, her hands folded in her lap in a posture I recognised. Because it was nearly identical to my own. She hadn't come to support Marcus exactly, not the way she might once have. She'd come, I suspected, because a mother can't easily stay away from the room where her son's choices finally get added up out loud. Whatever the total turns out to be. Judge Patricia Alvarez entered a few minutes past 9, compact and unhurried, reading glasses pushed up into steel grey hair. She took the bench with the efficiency of a woman who'd presided over hundreds of divorces like this one. She'd long since stopped being surprised by what people do to each other over money and pride. We're here on the matter of Delaney versus Delaney, Judge Alvarez said, opening a thin folder. Equitable distribution, contested. I've reviewed both supplemental disclosures and Mr. Okonkwo's forensic accounting report. Ms. Prescott, you may proceed. Eileen stood. She buttoned her blazer with the precision of a woman who'd rehearsed this in her sleep. She called Harold Okonkwo to walk the court through his findings first. His testimony took the better part of an hour, patient and methodical, laying out the $61,400 against the lease payments, the furniture deliveries, the jewellery purchase on Riverside Drive. Each figure matched precisely to a line in Marcus's bank records. Reinhardt cross-examined him for 20 minutes, trying, without much success, to suggest the numbers were coincidental or overstated. Okonkwo answered every question, the way I answer every question at the hospital. Plainly, without embellishment, letting the documents do the talking. When Reinhardt called Marcus to the stand, I watched him walk to the witness box, the same way I'd watched him walk out to his truck the morning the folder landed on the table. Chin up, shoulders back. A man performing confidence for an audience he still believed was mostly on his side. "Mr. Delaney," Reinhardt began, smooth and reassuring. "I want to be very clear with the court about the scope of these withdrawals. Isn't it true that $61,000, while significant, represents less than 15% of the total marital estate accumulated over 11 years? "That's correct," Marcus said. "And isn't it true," Reinhardt continued, "that you fully disclosed every account and asset in your possession, exactly as required by this court?" "Yes," Marcus said, his eyes fixed somewhere past Judge Alvarez's shoulder rather than on her face. "Every account, every dollar, nothing's hidden." He said it the same way he'd said it in the deposition months earlier. Same words, same practiced steadiness. I understood, sitting with my hands folded on my folder, that Marcus genuinely believed this sentence would hold. It had always held before. At his mother's table, in our marriage, in every room he'd ever walked into, assuming no one across from him held a number he hadn't already accounted for. Judge Alvarez made a small note and looked up. "Ms. Prescott, cross-examination." Eileen rose slowly. She walked to the podium and set down a single sheet of paper, face down. The way a person sets down a card they mean to turn over only once, only when it matters most. "Mr. Delaney," Eileen said, calm and unhurried, "you've testified twice now, under oath, that your financial disclosure represents every account and every dollar of the marital estate. I'd like to give you one more opportunity to reconsider that answer before I ask my next question." Marcus glanced at Reinhardt, whose face had gone carefully blank, the blankness of an attorney suddenly suspecting he's standing several steps behind wherever this room is actually headed. "I've told the truth," Marcus said, though something in his voice had thinned just slightly, the way a wire thins right before it gives. "Then let's confirm that together," Eileen said, and turned the paper over. "You've probably already guessed what was written on that page. You haven't guessed all of it." Before Eileen said another word, Judge Alvarez raised one hand, glancing at the clock. "Miss Prescott, we're approaching the midday recess. I'd like to take this next portion after lunch so the record isn't rushed. 90 minutes. We'll reconvene at 1. Eileen nodded. She set the paper face down again, exactly where it had been. The room exhaled all at once, the particular collective exhale of a courtroom that's just watched a door swing halfway open and then get gently, deliberately held there. I sat with that 90 minutes the way I sit with most difficult things, quietly, without drama. My mind kept returning to the page on the podium, the way a tongue returns to a sore tooth. Eileen and I ate a plain lunch in a small conference room down the hall, turkey sandwiches from the courthouse cafeteria. Neither of us said much. There was nothing left to say that hadn't already been said across 6 months of preparation. "Nervous?" Eileen asked, halfway through her sandwich. "No," I said, and meant it. "I've been nervous. This isn't that anymore. I've checked this math so many times I could recite it in my sleep." Eileen smiled at that, the small, satisfied smile of an attorney who spent her whole career waiting for exactly this kind of client. The kind who does the work quietly and shows up ready. "Then let's go finish it." In the hallway outside the courtroom, I saw Dot sitting alone on a wooden bench, a paper coffee cup untouched in front of her. I almost walked past out of habit, 11 years of small corrections still sitting somewhere in my chest. Instead, I stopped. "You holding up all right, Miss Dot?" I asked. Dot looked up, older somehow than she'd looked 3 hours earlier. "I don't know what's about to happen in there," she said, "but I know it's not going to be good for my son." "No," I said gently. "It probably isn't. But it's not going to be anything he didn't build himself, one choice at a time." Dot didn't argue with that. She nodded slowly and looked back down at her coffee. I walked on into the courtroom, my folder tucked under my arm, the envelope from my father resting against the first Magnolia statement inside it. Both warm now from being carried so close for so many months. I took my seat again beside Eileen. I thought about the loan officer named Grissom, about the angle of his chair, about the 4 minutes I'd allowed myself to cry in a parking lot 9 years ago. Then driving straight to a small credit union, building something no one in that mortgage office would ever know existed. I thought about my father's hands on the porch rail, turning his coffee cup slowly, telling me to keep one door only I could open. I thought about every dinner at Dot's table, passing the sweet tea, saying very little, filing each small correction away. Patient, exact, waiting for the moment the whole picture would need to be laid out at once. Judge Alvarez returned to the bench at 1 o'clock precisely. "Ms. Prescott," she said, "you may continue your cross-examination." Eileen rose again, walked to the same spot at the podium, and turned the page face up. "For the record," Eileen said, "I'm showing the witness exhibit 14, a certified account statement from First Magnolia Federal Credit Union." She approached the witness stand and set a single sheet in front of Marcus. "Mr. Delaney, do you recognize the account holder listed at the top of this statement?" Marcus looked down at the page. I watched his face from across the room. For the first time in 11 years of marriage, I saw an expression I'd never once seen on it. Not on our wedding day. Not the morning he set the folder on the table. Not even the day Kayla Vance walked out of his apartment for good. It was the look of a man realizing all at once the floor he'd been standing on had never actually belonged to him. "Renata Coleman," Marcus said quietly. "Louder for the record, please," Judge Alvarez said. "Renata Coleman," Marcus said again. His voice didn't thin this time so much as simply run out. The way water runs out of a cup tipped too far. "That is my client's maiden name," Eileen said, "for the record," though everyone already understood whose name it was. "Mr. Delaney, in your testimony this morning, you stated under oath that your financial disclosure represented every account and every dollar of the marital estate. Were you aware at the time you signed that disclosure that this account existed?" Reinhardt started to rise. "Objection, Your Honor. Relevance. This appears to be separate property predating the—" "I'll allow the question," Judge Alvarez said without looking up. "The witness will answer." "No," Marcus said. "I wasn't aware. You were married to Renata Delaney for 11 years, Eileen said. And you were unaware of an account she has held, and personally funded, for 9 of those 11 years." "I never saw a reason to go through her personal accounts," Marcus said. Some old defensiveness rose in his voice, the sound of a man reaching for footing that no longer existed. "That's not unusual in a marriage." "No," Eileen agreed. "It isn't. What's somewhat unusual, Mr. Delaney, is testifying twice under oath that your disclosure represents every account and every dollar of the marital estate, apparently having no idea what your own wife's finances actually contained, which raises the question of just how carefully you reviewed your own disclosure before signing it under penalty of perjury. That account has nothing to do with the marital estate," Marcus said. His voice rose slightly now, the first real crack I'd heard in it since the folder landed on the table. "It's not marital property if it's separate." "You're correct," Eileen said evenly. "It is separate property, established years before your marriage, funded exclusively from Mrs. Delaney's own income, never once commingled with joint funds. My client has never claimed otherwise. This court will confirm that in a moment from the certified records already in evidence. My question was never about whether this account belongs to the marital estate, Mr. Delaney. My question was about the completeness of your sworn disclosure, and about a lease agreement co-signed with a Kayla Vance 4 months before this divorce was filed, funded in part by $61,400, withdrawn from an account you shared with the woman sitting across this courtroom from you right now." The room had gone very still. Judge Alvarez had stopped writing entirely, her reading glasses catching the fluorescent light as she looked between Eileen and the witness stand. Dot, 3 rows back, had one hand pressed flat against her chest. Eileen turned to the exhibit one final time. "Your Honor, for the record, I'd ask that the court note the balance on Exhibit 14, dated as of the close of business last week." She read the number aloud, clean and unhurried, into a courtroom gone completely silent. The exact figure I had first read alone at my own kitchen table months earlier. The number my father had started building 9 years before. Either of us had any idea how much it would eventually matter. Marcus didn't say anything for a long moment. He looked instead at me, sitting calm and still at the plaintiff's table. My hands folded on top of a folder that had waited 11 years to be opened in exactly this room, in front of exactly this judge, at exactly this moment my father had once promised me would come. I didn't smile. I didn't look away either. I simply held his gaze. The way I'd held Grissom's chair with my eyes 9 years earlier, when he refused to turn it toward me. I let the silence in the room do the rest of the work, the way my father always said silence. Held long enough. Eventually did. Reinhardt tried briefly to recover. Your Honour, my client's testimony was made in good faith, based on a reasonable understanding of what constitutes the marital estate. There's no evidence of intentional perjury here, simply a misunderstanding of scope. Then perhaps Mr. Delaney can explain, Eileen said, why exactly 23 months ago his employer issued a formal notice, reducing his commission structure by 58%. A notice he disclosed to no one, not this court, not his own attorney, until 3 months ago. Not even, as far as this court's records show, his own mother. She produced a second document, the restructuring letter Okonkwo had traced from the subpoenaed garage cabinet months earlier. She handed it to the court clerk to be marked as the next exhibit. Your Honour, Eileen continued, I'd submit that the misunderstanding here isn't about the scope of a financial disclosure. It's about a man who spent 2 years hiding a career collapse from everyone in his life, including a wife who was still contributing to their joint household in good faith, while he quietly redirected $61,000 of that same joint household's money into an apartment lease for someone else, all while assuring this court, twice, under oath, that nothing was hidden. Marcus's hands, resting on the rail of the witness box, had gone still, the particular stillness of a person concentrating hard on not letting them shake. He didn't look at Reinhardt. He didn't look at his mother in the gallery. He looked for a long moment at the restructuring letter now sitting in a clear plastic sleeve on the clerk's desk, the same letter he'd folded and hidden in a locked cabinet in his own garage for nearly 2 years, rather than say 4 sentences out loud to the people who loved him. I didn't want anyone to think I was failing, Marcus said finally quietly. He wasn't really answering Eileen's question. He was answering some other question none of us had asked, the one that had been sitting underneath all of it the whole time. You could have told her, Eileen said, her voice softening for just a moment, not out of sympathy for Marcus specifically, something closer to professional weariness. She'd watched this exact confession arrive 2 years too late in a courtroom, instead of 2 years earlier, at a kitchen table. She reconciles a 7-figure hospital ledger every month without a single error. She could have handled a restructuring letter, Mr. Delaney. What she couldn't handle, what no one could reasonably be expected to handle, was finding out about it during a divorce filing, instead of during a conversation. Marcus didn't answer that. There was, I understood, watching him from the plaintiff's table, no answer that would have made the sentence any less true. Judge Alvarez took off her reading glasses. She set them down on the bench. She looked at Marcus for a long moment, an expression I couldn't entirely read, something between weariness and professional recognition. The look of a woman who'd seen this exact shape of collapse many times before. She'd long since stopped being surprised by how ordinary the reasons behind it usually were. Mr. Delaney, Judge Alvarez said, this court doesn't exist to judge a man for a career setback. It exists to ensure both parties in a marriage receive an honest accounting when that marriage ends. You had 2 years to tell your wife the truth about your finances. Instead, you chose to tell this court, under oath, twice, that a disclosure you knew to be incomplete was in fact complete. That is not a scope misunderstanding, Mr. Reinhardt. That is perjury, and I intend to treat it as such. The word landed the way a dropped glass lands, sudden and final. Everyone's attention snapped toward the single point of impact. Reinhardt said nothing. There was, I understood, watching him set down his pen, nothing left in his file that would help. Judge Alvarez called a brief recess to review the exhibits before issuing findings. The courtroom emptied into the hallway in a strange, muted quiet. The quiet that follows a moment everyone understands was significant, even before they know its exact shape. Dot didn't approach Marcus in the hallway. She sat alone on the same wooden bench as before, her coffee long gone cold. I passed by on my way to the water fountain and saw the older woman's shoulders shaking very slightly. Silently, in a way that had nothing to do with anger, I almost sat down beside her. I stopped myself. Not out of cruelty. I understood better than most people in that hallway that some grief needs to be sat with alone before anyone else gets to witness it. Eileen found me by the water fountain instead. "How are you holding up?" "Steady," I said, and meant it, though something in my chest had loosened in a way I hadn't expected. Some tension I'd apparently been carrying so long I'd stopped noticing its weight, until it started, slowly, to lift. "The perjury finding is significant," Eileen said. "It won't just affect the property division. Judge Alvarez will likely refer it separately. It changes the whole tenor of how the court views everything else in this case, including the dissipation claim." "What does that mean for the house?" I asked, in plain terms. "In plain terms," Eileen said, "it means the judge was already inclined to award you a larger share, given the dissipation evidence. Now she's looking at a party who lied to her twice under oath. I'd expect the equitable distribution to lean heavily in your favour. House included, and I'd expect the court to order Marcus to reimburse a significant portion of the dissipated funds from his share of any remaining assets." I nodded slowly, filing that the way I file everything, plainly, without drama. Though I allowed myself one small private thought, standing there in the hallway with the low hum of the water fountain beside me. I thought about Grissom and the chair he never once turned toward me. I thought that if he could see this hallway right now, see the name Renata Coleman sitting quiet and untouched at the centre of everything that just happened, he would probably still not understand what he'd actually witnessed 9 years ago. Some people never learn to read a ledger sitting right in front of them. Not until someone forces them to read it aloud. When court reconvened 40 minutes later, Judge Alvarez didn't waste words. Having reviewed the exhibits and testimony, she said, "This court finds that Mr. Delaney's financial disclosure was materially incomplete, and that his sworn testimony regarding its completeness was knowingly false. This court further finds that $61,400 in marital funds were dissipated to support an undisclosed relationship, in violation of Mr. Delaney's fiduciary duty to the marital estate." She continued, even and unhurried, laying out the ruling point by point. The marital home would go to me outright, its mortgage satisfied from Marcus's share of the remaining retirement assets. Marcus would reimburse the marital estate the full $61,400, recovered from his portion of the 401k and, if necessary, future wage garnishment. The first Magnolia account, Judge Alvarez noted for the record, remained entirely and exclusively my separate property, untouched by any portion of the ruling, exactly as it had always been. Finally, Judge Alvarez said, closing her folder, "Given the finding of knowingly false sworn testimony, this court will refer the matter to the district attorney's office for review of potential perjury charges. Mr. Delaney, I'd strongly recommend you retain separate counsel for that matter." Marcus didn't say anything. He sat very still at the defendant's table, his grey suit looking looser than ever. He stared at a spot on the table in front of him. The way a man stares at a ledger he finally understands he's been reading wrong his entire adult life. I didn't smile in the courtroom. I'd promised myself somewhere around the 3rd week of this whole ordeal. Whatever happened, I would not give anyone the satisfaction of watching me gloat. Gloating had never once been the point. The point had been the math. The math had simply finally been allowed to speak. Camille, sitting 3 rows behind me, let out a breath I could hear, even from the plaintiff's table. A long, shaking exhale. It carried 11 years of watching her older sister absorb small corrections. At a dinner table she'd never particularly wanted to sit at, Camille didn't say anything else, not yet. She reached forward and pressed one hand briefly against my shoulder. A single, steady point of contact. It said everything neither of us needed to put into words inside a courtroom. Judge Alvarez gathered her papers, thanked both counsel for their preparation, and adjourned the hearing. Chairs scraping, folders closing, low murmured conversation, the ordinary sounds of a courtroom clearing out, filling the space where, a few minutes earlier, a single number had hung in complete silence. Outside the courthouse on the wide limestone steps, Dot caught up to me before I reached my car. The older woman's eyes were red-rimmed, her usual sharpness worn thin by the day's proceedings. "I owe you an apology," Dot said. "Years of them, probably. I spent a long time telling you how to hold on to a man. The truth is, you were the one holding this whole family together. The entire time. None of us bothered to notice." I studied my mother-in-law's face for a long moment, looking for the old defensiveness, the old correction dressed up as concern. I found for the first time in 11 years something that looked genuinely like grief and genuinely like honesty sitting together in the same expression. "I appreciate you saying that, Miss Dot," I said. "I mean that. But I think the apology that matters more is the one you're going to owe yourself. For the years you spent watching your son perform a life he couldn't afford, and never once asked him why." Dot didn't argue with that either. She nodded, the way she'd nodded on the bench in the hallway, and turned to walk toward her own car. Alone. An old woman carrying a weight I understood was not mine to carry for her. Marcus emerged from the courthouse a few minutes later, Reinhardt walking briskly beside him, already talking, low and urgent, low and the tone of an attorney explaining what comes next. His client had just watched his entire financial life restructured in a single afternoon by a judge who'd stopped believing anything he said. Marcus glanced toward me once, standing near my car with Eileen. For a moment something passed across his face. In another life, it might have been the beginning of an apology. He didn't say anything. He got into his truck, alone, and drove away. I watched him go the way I'd once watched him back out of the driveway on an ordinary Tuesday morning 6 months earlier. Except this time I felt nothing hollow in my chest where the watching used to hurt. "You did good in there," Eileen said, once his truck had turned the corner and disappeared. "I mean that. A lot of clients want to perform the anger. You just let the numbers do it." "My father used to say the same thing," I said. "I don't raise my voice, I just check the math." "He sounds like he was a smart man," Eileen said. "He was," I said. For the first time that whole long day, I let myself smile. Small. Private. The kind of smile that belonged to no one in that parking lot but me. Camille drove me home that evening. We stopped first at our father's grave on the way, an unplanned detour I found myself asking for almost without meaning to. We stood together at the granite marker as the light went long and gold across the cemetery grass, neither of us saying much, until Camille finally spoke. "You did it, Daddy," Camille said quietly, to the stone. "She did exactly what you taught her to do." I said nothing for a long moment, just stood there with my sister's shoulder pressed against mine. The weight of the entire day finally settling into something that felt less like triumph and more like a debt, patiently paid in full. "Thank you," I finally said, to the stone, to my father, to 9 years of $200 deposits I'd never once regretted making. I checked the math. It came out exactly the way you said it would. 3 weeks later, the district attorney's office confirmed it would move forward. A formal review of Marcus's sworn testimony. Eileen explained it would likely take months. It could end in anything from a formal warning to a misdemeanor perjury charge, its own fine, its own probation. Marcus's employer learned through the court proceedings that the restructuring letter had surfaced in a public filing. They opened their own internal review. How had a 2-year-old commission dispute gone so thoroughly undisclosed to a spouse listed as a dependent on his benefits paperwork? I heard secondhand, through Denise's ever-reliable chain of Cedar Hollow gossip, that it eventually cost Marcus his position entirely. The territory he'd spent 2 years quietly failing was, finally, formally, no longer his to fail at. None of that widening came from anything I did directly. I hadn't called his employer. I hadn't spoken to the district attorney beyond my required testimony. I'd simply told the truth, plainly, under oath, in a courtroom built for exactly that purpose. I let the institutions whose job it was to follow up on a lie do the rest of the work themselves. That, I thought, was its own kind of justice. The kind that didn't require me to raise my voice even once. I thought, in the weeks that followed, about Grissom. Wondered what a review like this one might have looked like 9 years ago, if anyone had ever bothered to audit the small daily choices men like him made about whose chair got turned and whose questions got answered. Nobody had. Nobody likely ever would. Not for every quiet insult that never made it into a courtroom, never got read into a record. Adamantton never got the chance to detonate in front of a judge, with the power to call it what it actually was. Weeks after the ruling, I sat in Eileen's office again. It was one of our last formal meetings on the case. "And what about the ones who don't have a lawyer like you in their corner?" I asked. "The ones who get talked past in a bank or a courtroom or a boardroom. The ones who never get the chance to lay a number down on a table and watch the whole room finally listen." Eileen didn't have a clean answer for that. To her credit, she didn't pretend to. "I don't know," she said. I wish I did. I know you did everything right. I know most people who get talked past never even get the chance to prove it the way you just did. I nodded slowly, turning that over, the way I turn over any number that doesn't fully reconcile. Some accounts I was beginning to understand would probably never balance completely, not in one lifetime, not even in a whole courtroom's worth of afternoons. That didn't mean you stopped checking the math, it just meant you kept a door of your own, quietly, patiently, for exactly as long as it took. Camille had been sitting in the gallery the day of the ruling, 3 rows back on the opposite side from Dot. She met me on the courthouse steps afterward with both arms already open. No words needed yet. Just the particular embrace of a sister who's watched someone she loves carry a weight alone for months. Finally set it down in front of witnesses. You didn't even raise your voice in there, Camille said, pulling back to look at my face. Not once. I watched the whole thing, and I don't think you raised it a single time. I didn't need to, I said. The account did the raising for me. Daddy would have loved that line, Camille said, laughing through what was very clearly the beginning of tears. He'd have said it himself if he could have been in that room. He was, I said quietly. Every bit of that account was him. Every dollar he taught me to protect before I even knew what protecting meant. We drove back to Cedar Hollow together that evening. Camille at the wheel so I could finally let my shoulders come down from where they'd been sitting for 6 months. Somewhere along the 2-lane highway between Macon and home, Camille reached over and turned on the radio. An old gospel station, the one our mother used to play on Sunday mornings. Neither of us said much else the rest of the drive. Some victories I was learning didn't need narration. They just needed to be felt, quietly, in a car with someone who'd known me my whole life. In the weeks that followed, the ripples from the ruling kept surfacing in small procedural ways Eileen had warned me to expect. The district attorney's office formally opened its file on the perjury referral, assigning it to a junior prosecutor who called me once, briefly to confirm a handful of dates for the record. Marcus's former employer, reviewing the court filings as part of its own compliance process, sent a letter to its full sales division, reminding every regional director that undisclosed material changes to compensation required formal acknowledgement. A policy update I suspected existed because of Marcus specifically, even if his name never once appeared in it. Dot's pastor heard a version of the story secondhand, the way most of Cedar Hollow eventually did. He gave a sermon one Sunday about the difference between appearing strong and actually being honest. He never named names. Half the congregation, Denise reported, spent the whole service glancing sideways at the empty pew where Marcus used to sit beside his mother. I didn't attend that sermon. I'd started attending the earlier service instead, the one with the smaller choir and the folding chairs still set up from Wednesday Bible study, partly because the light came in better through the east windows that time of morning. Partly, I admitted to myself, because I wanted a version of church that belonged entirely to my next chapter, not 11 years of a pew I'd shared with someone else's family. I used part of one Saturday that October to finally clean out the garage, the same garage that had once held Marcus's locked filing cabinet. Now empty, its door left open and harmless in a corner, I planned to turn into a small workshop of my own. Tucked behind a stack of old paint cans, I found a single photograph from our wedding day, the two of us younger and unguarded, standing in front of the same AME church, where my mother's alto voice still lives in the choir loft floor. I looked at it a long moment, neither bitter nor sentimental, just quietly curious about the two people in that photograph, how little either of us had understood that day about what we'd eventually cost and teach each other. I didn't throw it away. I put it in a small box in the back of the hall closet, beside the empty space where the cigar box used to sit. Some parts of a life, even the parts that end, still deserve a place to be kept rather than erased. Autumn came to Cedar Hollow the way it always does, slow and gold, the pecan trees along Lorraine Street dropping their leaves in the same unhurried rhythm they've kept for as long as I can remember. I stayed in the house on the ruling's terms, the mortgage cleared, my name now the only one on the deed. I spent the first few weekends after the divorce was finalised doing small deliberate things to the place. Nothing about erasing Marcus. Everything about finally making the house entirely, unambiguously, mine. I repainted the porch swing my mother-in-law had once given us as a wedding gift. A soft warm blue instead of the white it had always been. I hung it back up on the same hooks. Some things, I decided, deserved to stay, even after the marriage that brought them didn't. Camille came up from Savannah again that October. No particular occasion, just a weekend visit we'd promised each other back in the spring, before any of this started. We spent a Saturday afternoon on the newly painted porch swing, drinking sweet tea, watching the pecan trees start to turn. "You seem lighter," Camille said, studying my face. "Not happy exactly." "Lighter?" "I feel lighter," I admitted. "I didn't realize how much weight I was carrying until I set some of it down." 11 years is a long time to carry something, Camille said. "I'm glad you finally got to put it down in front of people who had to watch." "Me too," I said. "I used to think justice had to be loud to count. I don't think that anymore. I think it just has to be true. It has to land somewhere real." Camille reached over and squeezed my hand. The same gesture she'd used 100 times over the years, in 100 different kitchens and porches, and hospital waiting rooms. "Daddy would be proud of you," she said. "Not just for the money, for how you carried it. Quiet the whole way through." "He taught me that part," I said. "The accounts, I built myself. The quiet. That part was all him." We sat a while longer, not saying much, the swing creaking gently on its newly painted hooks. I thought, watching the light shift gold across my own front yard, that this was close to peace, as close as a person gets to feel in a single afternoon. Not triumph, not vindication exactly, just a porch, a sister, a slow autumn evening, and nothing left to prove to anyone. Dot called every few weeks now, tentative at first, then steadier. The call settling into something neither of us had ever quite had before. Not friendship exactly, but an honesty that hadn't existed across 11 years of Sunday dinners. Dot never asked to be forgiven outright, and I never offered a clean, sweeping forgiveness in return. That wasn't the kind of thing either of us actually needed. What Dot got instead was smaller and more durable, an open door, conditional and plain. I would take her calls. I would sit with her at church some Sundays, in a pew a few rows back from where Dot used to sit with Marcus. I would not, however, pretend the years of small corrections had never happened. Dot, to her credit, never asked me to. One Sunday in early October, Dot invited me to lunch at the diner on Vinerville Road, the same one where Marcus and I used to get pancakes on Saturdays before his schedule filled up with secrets. Dot ordered coffee and said very little for the first 10 minutes, turning her cup slowly on the table, the way my own father used to turn his on the porch rail. I wondered, watching her, whether that particular gesture was simply what quiet grief looks like in every family, regardless of which side of a divorce you end up standing on. I used to think the measure of a good wife was how much she could absorb without complaint. Dot finally said, "That's what my own mother taught me. I passed it right along to you, every Sunday, for 11 years. I never once stopped to ask if it was true." "It's not," I said, gently but plainly the way I say most things now. "The measure of a good wife or a good anybody is whether the people around her are being honest with her in return." I was. Marcus wasn't. "That's the whole accounting of it, Miss Dot. It was never about how much I could absorb." Dot nodded slowly, turning her coffee cup one more time. "I'm going to try to unlearn some of that," she said. "I'm 71 years old and I'm going to try anyway." "That's more than a lot of people manage," I said, and meant it. I reached across the table and passed Dot the sugar, the way I once passed her the sweet tea at 100 Sunday dinners. This time, for the first time, it felt like something offered between equals, not something owed. Marcus reached out exactly once, in November. A short, careful voicemail, asking if we could talk, no agenda specified. I listened to it twice, sitting at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee, going cold in front of me. I didn't call back for 3 days. When I finally did, I kept it brief. "I don't have anything left to say in anger," I told him, "but I also don't have anything to build with you anymore. I hope you get your finances straightened out. I hope the DA's review goes easier than it might. I mean both of those things. I just don't need to be the one standing next to you while it happens." Marcus was quiet on the line for a long moment. "I never asked about that account," he finally said, "because I never thought there was anything about you I hadn't already figured out." "I was wrong about a lot more than the money, Renata." "You were," I agreed gently. There was no longer any need to make the sentence sharper than it already was. "I hope you figure the rest of it out too. Take care of yourself, Marcus." I hung up and sat a while longer at the table, found, somewhat to my own surprise, that I felt something closer to peace than triumph. the quiet, settled peace of a ledger that had finally completely balanced. I used a portion of that autumn, too, to do something my father would have approved of, more than almost anything else I could have done with the money the court had awarded me. I set up a small scholarship fund through the credit union on Route 41, $3,000 a year, earmarked for a young woman from Cedar Hollow heading off to study accounting or finance, the exact fields where I'd spent my whole career learning to see the number underneath the number. I named it simply the Willis Coleman Fund. I told no one at First Magnolia it had anything to do with a chair that had never once turned toward me 9 years earlier. Some doors, my father used to say, aren't for explaining. They're just for opening quietly for the next person who needs one. The first recipient of the fund was a 19-year-old from the east side of Cedar Hollow named Priya Okafor, a soft-spoken sophomore at Middle Georgia State, studying accounting. She worked 3 shifts a week at a pharmacy just to cover textbooks. I met her briefly at the credit union the day the first check was issued. Something about the young woman's careful, unshowy competence reminded me so strongly of myself at that age. The way she thanked the branch manager plainly, instead of gushing. I found myself lingering in the lobby a few extra minutes just to talk. "Can I ask you something?" Priya said, tucking the letter into her bag. "Why accounting out of all the things you could have funded?" "Because numbers don't lie," I said. "People do. Rooms do. Numbers just sit there. Patient. Waiting for somebody willing to actually read them. I spent a long time being the only person in a lot of rooms willing to do that work. I'd like it if you didn't have to spend quite as long as I did." Priya nodded slowly, the way a person nods when they've just been handed something heavier than they expected. "I won't forget that," she said. I believed her. It was the particular belief of a woman who recognizes the same steady patience in a stranger young enough to be her daughter. My own father had once recognized it in me, on a porch, over a slowly turning coffee cup. And one plain, unshakable piece of advice. Marcus's redemption, such as it was, came slower and smaller. The way real change usually does when it isn't being staged for anyone's benefit. He accepted a plea agreement with the district attorney's office that winter, a reduced misdemeanor charge, a fine, 18 months of unsupervised probation. A resolution Eileen described as about as soft a landing as a man in his position could have hoped for. He found a new job by spring, a smaller territory for a competitor company, a title with less shine to it than the one he used to hand out on business cards at Dot's dinner table. He took it, according to Dot, without complaint. The particular quiet of a man who'd finally run out of performances to give. He called Dot every Sunday now, a habit he hadn't kept with any real consistency in years. He started, slowly, paying down the $61,000 the court had ordered him to reimburse. A few $100s a month, garnished automatically, so he never had the chance to quietly let it slide the way he'd once quietly let so many other truths slide. Dot mentioned, on one of her calls with me, that he'd started seeing a counsellor. Something about learning to tell the truth about money before it became a debt he owed to more than just a bank. Kayla, for her part, moved to Atlanta that spring. A fresh start. Denise heard about it secondhand, the way Denise heard about most things in Cedar Hollow. She'd landed a new position at a larger dental practice. 3 chairs instead of 1, better hours, better pay. According to the same chain of gossip, she told a mutual friend something plain. No plans to date anyone with a hidden financial history ever again. I felt no particular satisfaction hearing that. Just a small, distant recognition that Kayla, too, had learned something expensive about a man who was better at performing solvency than actually building it. I hoped, in the specific, limited way I hope for most people now, that the lesson landed gentler for Kayla than it had for me. The district attorney's office, midway through that following spring, offered me a chance to give a victim impact statement as part of the sentencing process. An offer Eileen said I was under no obligation to accept. I thought about it for several days before deciding. I don't need to stand up and list what he did to me, I told Eileen. I turned the offer over the way I turn over any decision that matters. The court already has that on the record, in his own sworn words. I don't need the theatre of saying it again out loud. "That's your right," Eileen said, closing the file on her desk. "Some clients need the statement. Others feel exactly the way you do. There's no wrong answer here." "I got my answer already," I said, calm as always. It came with a balance attached to it, read out loud by a judge who believed every single word. That was enough. I declined the statement. I spent that same afternoon instead at the credit union, reviewing the Willis Coleman Fund's first full year of disbursements with the branch manager, a task that felt to me like the truer form of closure. Numbers moving forward instead of backward, a ledger built out of what I'd kept, instead of a list of everything that had once been taken. The branch manager, a soft-spoken woman named Carla Whitmore, had taken over from the teller who first printed my statement all those months ago. She mentioned that 2 more young women from Cedar Hollow had applied for the fund that spring, both studying finance, both working part-time jobs to cover what scholarships didn't reach. Word's getting around, Carla said. People are starting to ask about the man behind the name, Willis Coleman. He wasn't a man of many words, I said. He believed in doors more than speeches. I think he'd rather the fund speak for him than any story I could tell about him. Carla nodded, the way people nod when they understand more than they say. Then I suppose it already is, she said. She slid the disbursement summary across the counter for my signature, the same quiet gesture that had started all of this 9 years earlier, in this very building, at this very counter. A different teller, a $200 deposit, and nobody in the room that day could have known it would eventually change everything. I don't need you to forgive him, Dot said that particular afternoon. I just wanted you to know he's trying to be a different kind of man than the one who set that folder on your table. I hope he manages it, I said. And I meant it. The specific, limited way I mean most things now. Generous without being naive, hopeful, without handing back anything I'd already rightfully kept for myself. On a clear evening in late November, I sat on my newly painted porch swing. The sealed envelope from my father rested on the small table beside me. It was worn soft now, at every fold, from a full year of being carried and read. Finally, it could be set down for good. The first Magnolia statement sat folded inside it. Its balance was no longer a secret weapon. Just a number now, quiet and mine, exactly the way my father had always meant it to be. I thought about Priya, at the credit union counter, tucking her scholarship letter into her bag. I thought about Camille's voice on the porch a month earlier, telling me I seemed lighter. I thought about Dot, learning slowly to unlearn 71 years of old lessons, one Sunday phone call at a time. Mostly, though, I thought about my father, turning his coffee cup on this same kind of evening, all those years ago, telling a 22-year-old girl to keep one door only she could open. I had kept it. I had opened it exactly once, in exactly the right room, in front of exactly the right people. That, I understood now, sitting quiet in the cooling autumn air, was the whole of what he'd been trying to give me. Not the money, the knowing, the patient, unglamorous knowing that some doors are worth building years before you ever need to walk through them. I don't raise my voice, I said softly. To the porch, to the pecan trees, to no one in particular. I just checked the math. Then I rose, gathered the envelope against my chest and walked back inside, to a kitchen that was, at last, entirely my own.